Dean Legge Show. Thought I hadn't pressed the record button for a second there. Dean Legge Show for Georgia's week off. Second week off. Well, it's been a nutty season so far. Todd Gurley looks like he's back in tow here soon. We haven't seen him cleared as of noon on Friday, but my expectation is that I'm not the only one, is that Todd will play. We're going to get a lot of questions this week about Florida and Todd, and I will try to do my best to answer them in general. It's an off week. I'll tell you, I could certainly use the off week. That was back to, but we drove to Arkansas and Missouri, and by the time we got back from Little Rock, it was time to kind of take a deep breath. Of course, Georgia flew back and forth. And I think they really would like a week off. But in this time, Georgia has played really well these last 3 games from Vanderbilt on. They really have played well. They've started moving towards the top of the SEC in all sorts of rankings. Of course, statistics. I know statistics are for losers, but Georgia right now is ranked first in scoring offense, 43.4 points a game, 265.9 yards in rushing offense. Scoring defense took a little bit of a hit because of the second half last week against the Hogs. Georgia's still tied for fifth, 20 points a game with Mississippi State. Rushing defense, Georgia took a slight hit because they were playing Arkansas. They are now allowing 105 defensive yards. Total offense, Georgia's about in the middle. Pass offense, Georgia's 13th of 14. Total defense, Georgia's near the top. They're at 5th, but they're in a little cluster there with the Gators and LSU in total, what's called total defense. Pass defense, Georgia went backwards a little bit here too this past week. But in the end, when you go to the big snapshot, Georgia is 1-13-7-1 in offense. They are 3-9-5-5 on defense. That's pretty good. Alabama is the one offensively and defensively that is in the top half of every single statistical category. Other teams that are not doing that bad, Auburn, Mississippi State is in the top 2 of every offensive category except one, but on defense, they're 14th. Am I reading that right? In total defense. So, every team has some issues. Vanderbilt leading the way on that front. Arkansas defensively has struggled. But what we're seeing right now, just in general, and by the way, in the other 6 statistical categories that sort of matter, Georgia's 5th in kickoff return, 6th in punt return, 7th in interception, 5 in sacks, 7th in tackles for loss. But perhaps the biggest thing out there you want to be best at, Georgia's number 1 in turnover margin in the SEC. Alabama's 10th. South Carolina's 10th. Auburn is 6th. Mississippi State is 7th. Ole Miss is 2nd. So, with the teams that Georgia will quite possibly play in the SEC championship, should they get there, and it looks like they will, they're going to have to rely certainly on their turnover abilities, their abilities to get turnovers. And in these really the whole season, but certainly the last 4 games, they have been the defense has been very influential in the turnover situation with Georgia. And if you look back, Swan set Georgia up to win the game against South Carolina. You had a defensive touchdown against Tennessee. I believe they had a defensive touchdown against Troy. I know they did against Tennessee, Vanderbilt. They did not have one against Missouri, but they did have one against Arkansas. And I'm sure the number isn't this, but my guess would be if you score a defensive touchdown, you probably have a 93% chance of winning a game. So anyhow, a lot of rambling there. I'll get to the questions real quick. One thing people are asking, and it seems the answer to this is pretty clear, is that Will Muschamp will be the coach for the Gators in Jacksonville. They're going to go with Tion Harris at quarterback. There's a lot of Florida's really struggling right now, probably the most they ever have since Mark Richt's been the head coach. If Georgia were to win against Florida, their 4-game winning streak would be the longest since the 1998 to 2003 stretch that the Gators had. So Georgia really has a shot to take strangling control of this series with Florida. So we'll see how that goes. But I think Georgia's in really good shape on that front. First question, UGA Dog Forever 08. Will Sony or Keith be available for Florida? I don't expect Keith to play. I do expect Sony to play. That's not 100%, but that's what it seems to me like is going to happen. He's got a pretty significant shoulder injury, but at the same time, trying to figure out where all this is coming from. It's driving me crazy here. Maybe that worked. Sony's got a pretty significant shoulder injury, but it does look like, from what I can tell, he will play against the Gators. Will Todd Gurley be cleared before Florida? I would be very surprised if this is what Wallace 3037 asks. Will Todd Gurley be cleared to play? I think so. That's been my expectation for the entire time. There's been a lot of guessing in the media. We've really failed in general. Just that's another story for another day. But there's been a lot of people getting some stuff wrong that they shouldn't be getting wrong, frankly. Little details. Will Justin Scott Wesley be effective or play? Justin was at Arkansas, but Justin has definitely disappeared. But he's played this season. He played at Missouri, so excuse me. This season counts for Justin. He's already redshirted, so it's go time for Justin. Dave Ombre asks, what's put the biggest smile on my face, Dean Legge's face, so far this season? Has there been anything that has disappointed you so far? And a quick basketball topic. Have you heard anything about the freshman? Basketball first. No, I've not heard anything, but I do expect his name is difficult for me to pronounce. So the freshman from Michigan should contribute. I was talking with Fletcher Page. We really spend an unhealthy amount of time talking about men's basketball in general and men's basketball at Georgia. I mean, I played basketball in college. Fletcher played in high school. So we both like basketball quite a bit. I don't know if this team can get to the tournament, and I don't know that the SEC is very difficult. But I would like to reserve judgment a little bit. 20 wins may not be in this team, but they're playing a conference that's so weak that they definitely could get there. And I think the NCAA is not going to let an 18 or 19 win Georgia team get in from the SEC. From the ACC, sure, Big East, where the schedule is better and more complicated, so to speak. But I'd have to go down the list and count up the wins. The biggest smile on my face so far this season, well, I think the biggest disappointment was losing to South Carolina, a team I said after the game, said leading up to the game, these guys are not good. People were saying that they're a better program than Georgia, which is hysterical. I think that was I think that's easily the biggest disappointment. Number 2 would be the Todd thing. But as it turns out, neither of those things, as it stands on October 24th, it really affects this season at all in any way right now, because the path is clear for Georgia to play for the national championship, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The biggest smile, well, I mean, I think one thing was, just for me personally, because I know Bryce Ramsey and his family relatively well, I think the biggest thing for me personally was seeing Bryce finally, after meeting them in 2011, early 2011, and following him through recruiting. I think him actually playing in that first drive where he showed what he has the ability to do, for me personally, that was a good personal moment. I think if you're a Georgia fan, what happened either against Arkansas, Missouri, or Clemson should bring, or Tennessee. I mean, those now are not considered big games, but they were big games going into it. And for me, I really thought Georgia would beat Clemson. I didn't think that they would beat them 52-21, or what is it, 45-21. But that was a pretty bad beating. What Georgia did in Missouri was a pretty bad beating, and what they did to Arkansas was a pretty bad beating. What they did to Troy was a pretty bad beating. What they did to Vanderbilt was a pretty bad beating. This is a pretty good team, so there's been plenty to smile about. Just for me, though, personally, it was watching Bryce finally get out there and be able to throw. Parker Morgan, an old dog poster from years ago who worked for me, comes up with the dumbest question. I'm stunned by his ignorance here. He asks, Coke Zero worth a shot? Hell no, that is disgusting. Coke Zero is Diet Coke and Coca-Cola's mistake pregnancy. And, you raise the kid and you try to make it go right, but then they get divorced. And then mom gets custody, and like Daryl from down the street is who mom marries next. And then you wind up with Coke Zero 18 years later. Very disappointed by that question. Even more disappointed with Ethan Birch's idiotic statement after that. I'd like to say there's a chance Legge would like it. Coke Zero and Diet Coke are pretty much the same thing, right? I'm hoping that's sarcasm. I'm guessing it's not. We got a long way to go here at Dog Post. I'm going to tell you that right now. Moose 1517. Oh. I should have read these questions beforehand. Moose 1517. Dean, what's your opinion of the progression of Mark Richt's haircut? I'm not picking on his hair, man. Listen. Fletcher Page has Muppet hair. Mark Richt's got Muppet hair too. It's okay. It works for, Big Bird. It was fine, or whoever. We can't all be blessed with great hair. I'm getting gray hair, which is bad. Aspen Dog. Are guys like O'Neal and McGee ever going to get to play this year, or just not good fits for the system? I don't know if Johnny O'Neal is ever going to play. Sean McGee, McGee's got a little bit more time in the grand scheme of things. I mean, he's coming off of a red shirt year. I guess Johnny is too. So they both have a little bit of time, but with Johnny, his situation at linebacker is a little bit more complicated than Sean's at outside linebacker. They're both reserve guys though. Is Justin Scott Wesley still hurt, or has Georgia just not needed him to play yet? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think he's hurt. I'm not going to talk about Jonathan Rump. He's not relevant. Does Georgia plan to keep J.J. Green at running back the rest of the season? No, I don't think. I think J.J. I think we could see last year J.J. had a good game against Tennessee. I think we know J.J. is not an SEC running back. It's just not what he does. TL Log Dog. Tennessee Log Dog, I'm assuming. If Georgia takes care of business the rest of the way, what SEC team do you think Georgia will match up against in the SEC championship? Oh, boy. I keep talking with people that I really, respect about football about this. We have yet to come up with an answer. The default would be Alabama, but it could be Ole Miss because they've already beaten Bama, and Ole Miss has to lose twice for Bama not to get there. You look at Ole Miss's schedule, and it's doable. Now, if they lose to LSU Saturday night, which is possible, then they get into a situation where Ole Miss is in a touch of trouble. Now, I mean, Bama's still got to deal with Auburn. And frankly, Auburn's not out of it either, although Auburn's tests to get to Atlanta are a little more complicated. They've already lost to State. They need State to lose twice. And, they got to go to Georgia. So Auburn's in a complicated situation. Ole Miss still has to play at LSU where they're favored. They play Auburn at home where they will likely be a slight favorite. That's a toss-up game. They'll beat the crap out of Presbyterian. They'll play at Arkansas, which is a touch tricky in Fayetteville. The Hogs have played well in Fayetteville to some, for the most part. And then they host State. I think we're going to see a one-loss team play Georgia with either 1 or 2 losses in the championship game. The winner of that game will be playing in the college football playoff. It will either be, I don't think we can leave Missouri out of this yet. It will either be from the East playing in the playoff. It will either be Georgia with a win in the championship game or Missouri being perfect and winning the championship game. From the West, we still have Auburn, who only has 1 loss. We still have Bama, who only has 1 loss. Well, one of those two is going to have 2 losses or more. We know that. Then we have Ole Miss or State. One of those will have at least 1 loss. If you're the Western school, you got to wonder if you want to play for the championship or not and play Georgia or play Missouri. Because the winner of that game, yes, will go for sure, but the 1-loss non-SEC West participant will almost certainly just walk into the playoff. They'll have to be nervous about it, but they'll just walk into the playoff. I will add, we still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weekends of games remaining. I have been around long enough at 37 to well remember the 2007 season, which was crazy. To remember the 2006 season, which was crazy. To remember the 1996 season, which was crazy. So this last weekend, these last 2 weekends of college football are going to be bananas. B-A-N-N-A-S, as Gwen Stefani said. I'm sure I misspelled that. But anyhow, I think it's probably going to be Ole Miss or Alabama. Auburn has the furthest to go, but State hasn't beaten Bama. So that's my thing with State. They have not beaten Bama. Ole Miss has, and State has to go to Bama. So, State still has to deal with at Kentucky, which they should win. They play Arkansas, they should win that. Tennessee Martin, they should win that. They play at Bama. Then they host Vanderbilt, who they'll kill. And then they host Mississippi. There definitely could be a scenario where we're flipping coins. We could have 3 11-1s, 7-1. Bama loses to Ole Miss. Bama beats Mississippi State. Mississippi State beats Ole Miss. Then we go to Section H of the tiebreaker. We're flipping coins. If Gurley is back before Holly's dog. First post. Welcome to Dog Post, Holly. Holly's. That could be where you live. I don't know. Holly's dog. If Todd Gurley is back for Florida and plays the remainder of the season, does he get your Heisman vote? If Todd's playing the way he did when he left, he's number 1 for me. And people who don't vote him number 1 are total hypocrites and charlatans. Good dog, 47-33. Is that David Pollock and Odell Thurman? In your opinion, why has Malcolm Parrish not played more? He's only a true freshman. Do you think that his ceiling is? But what do you think his ceiling is in Pruitt's scheme? Well, Malcolm's going to have to get a little bit football smarter. But yeah, it's a slightly surprising that he hasn't played more. Dominique has played great. Not that anyone should be surprised that someone from Tucker plays so well, lest we forget. But I think Malcolm Parrish is going to play in the future, not this year. Big Band Man. Dean, do the Gators have the best defense Georgia's seen so far this season? I don't know, man. I think they are getting to a tipping point here. I just talked about Malcolm Parrish. I think Florida's broken. They're going to have one shot to get back on track. That's against Georgia. And, we saw Georgia in 2009 be broken. They couldn't figure out how to beat Florida. They were broken 2010. They couldn't beat a relatively bad Florida team. So I think their defense is fine. Georgia's played plenty of defenses this year that have been pretty good. And, they've run all over them. Here comes some people's favorite part of the program. Come here, Penny. I know. Are we being friends? Okay. Good Lord. Some of y'all are freaks. Okay. Weights 24. I've been really impressed with David Andrews' play at center this year. I think he's been the key to the offensive line's success. Who steps in if he goes down? What does the future look like at center? Hard to follow Ben Jones and David Andrews. I think it's going to be, personally, I think it's going to be Isaiah Wynn. Does Isaiah Wynn? I'm not sure if that's who. Yes, Isaiah Wynn, the younger kid that wore number 90. And at the beginning, he actually started against Tennessee. He has played really well. There's been some scuttlebutt that if David Andrews wasn't so entrenched at center, that Isaiah would play more. You got to have centers, man. They are so critical. And it looks like Georgia's got. Now, who would be the next guy? I think it might be if David were to get hurt. I don't know if they would go straight with Isaiah. I don't think they would go with Cublano there. Maybe they would slide Pike there and then put. If you move Pike to center or Cublano, Wynn would come in and play. Watts Dantzler would play more. Josh Cardiello would have to play some. But I think they just don't want David to get hurt is the answer. Lee Dan, assuming there was no Todd Gurley, how do you think Nick Chubb's explosion on the college football scene would be compared to Herschel's opening at Tennessee? I think Herschel, I mean, it's not a bad comparison necessarily, but whenever you do say Herschel Walker, people just start rolling their eyes, and they just fairly or unfairly start rolling their eyes and saying, "Oh, you know." But what Nick did at Missouri was very impressive. Not the yardage necessarily, but the way in which he. Are you coming in the shot? You better not stop the recording. I know that. The way in which he came into the game and was given the ball. He didn't dominate Missouri. He dominated Arkansas. And I think, you know, in my opinion, it wouldn't be celebrated quite the same way. But it's similar. I mean, it's not too far away. Todd's first two games, he didn't play the same way that Nick did. He was explosive and a killer against Buffalo. But at Missouri, that game was won by Jarvis. It wasn't won by, you know, Todd. I don't know. I mean, I think the media landscape has changed. And I think that it's going to – I remember writing about Herschel. It's hard to remember way back then that you basically were listening to that game on radio, and a lot of people, that's the only way you could see what happened. So we've been integrated with Herschel for the last 30 years and what he did at UT that first night. But this was for the whole world to see. Problem is that the whole world sees everything now, so they're not as impressed. But, yeah, I mean, if you look at what Nick did, I think he had more yards, more carries, and the same amount of touchdowns as Herschel did at UT that time. I mean, it's a hell of a game. I mean, he played great. It would not be what Herschel – that's a tough comparison. Kelly, 1980. Who do you see Georgia finishing the class out with? Are there any surprises you're hearing about that may shock the world come signing day? We're too far away for me to know about surprises yet. Can Georgia pull any Florida talent now that they have a dumpster fire? I mean, I'd watch Adonis Thomas for sure. I'd watch him, the biggest. And as far as closing the class out, I mean, you saw Abernathy went to UT. That I expect Slayton to go to Georgia. I'm trying to think of other guys. I think the big thing is you hold on to Terry Godwin, etc. I don't see them grabbing Chuma. Sweat seems like a little too far away, but Virginia Tech's pretty bad right now too. So right now, I mean, it's late October. We're still, if it were late December, it would still seem a little tough to know about signing day. And the other thing is, Georgia's really changed the way they recruit. And so it's tougher for those of us who covered it for such a long time to know where they're going when they kind of might not know where they're going either. So they're kind of changing the way they recruit. But I watched Adonis Thomas because if I were him, I'd take a look at what's going on in Georgia. And the other thing too is when Florida changes eventually, they're gonna come after Georgia kids. So it always makes for a fascinating January. SM Burton, last question. Since we're on a bye week, can we get an update on our top recruits? TT, Trenton Thompson. Well, I asked about Trenton not that long ago by somebody in the program, and they said how impressive he is, and that the fact that he's getting double teamed, in some cases triple teamed, and still is making as many tackles as he is, just speaks to how good he is. Terry Godwin is last year. He was as good a football player as I saw last year. That included Mitch Hyatt, etc. Terry Godwin's a straight-up star. They got to keep him from Alabama. I expect that to happen. I also expect some drama along the way. I don't know how Callaway's doing or Westover. I saw Westover live against Lee County, and they, of course, had a tough day that day. Yes, Trenton is a very strong commit. I think he wants Roquan Smith. I think everybody at Georgia wants Roquan Smith to go to Athens. I think Terry is not as strong as Trenton, but I think that he is. It would surprise me. I'm not saying it would stun me. It would surprise me if he went somewhere other than Georgia. Sweat, Jefferson Chuma. I don't see Chuma. I just, I don't think so. Sweat seems unlikely, but Virginia Tech's such a disaster right now. They may go grab another running back, maybe, because they may feel like Keith is not what he once was. But that's recruiting just fluctuates so much. It's hard to totally tell because I don't think they totally. I think they know where they'd like to go with these last 5 or 6 guys. I don't think that means that they're going to get there, which means they may go to Plan B guys. Dean Legge Show, week of Georgia's off week. Go have fun if you can this weekend, whatever that is. I'm going to be doing yard work. I'm going to be dealing with my cat, which y'all see all the time, and I'm going to be dealing with texts that you can hear. So Georgia enters in the stretch run. I think they're 6-1. They have one loss, whatever it is. If they win out, they will be in the playoff. And that's not crazy. That's not crazy to say. If they lose to Auburn and win the championship game, they will almost certainly play in the playoff. So I think Georgia is sitting in about as good a position as they could have been sitting in, considering Todd Gurley hasn't played this season and they lost a game. Both those things. The big game is Auburn, but I think there's a lot of Georgia people want to thrash Florida really good one time. They had their shot last year, but they never could just pull away at the end because of the bad play by Artie Lynch. But Georgia's 3 wins in a row. We'll talk about Florida a little bit more next week on the Dean Legge Show. Have fun doing yard work.